Yeah, I find it incredible, the alternate reality that Representative Goldman is living in. I mean, he just stated that there has never been an occasion in which the White House, the Biden White House, has threatened or pressured White House social media companies to take down social media posts. But I have timestamps, I have emails, we come with receipts. I mean, February 6th, 2021, 9:45 p.m., Rob Flattery, White House official demanding Twitter take down a parody of Finnegan Biden, Hunter Biden's adult daughter. And we have all the receipts on this. I mean, we can go over this over and over again, but it would be a waste of time. Denying reality, as my colleagues on the left continue to do, is a disservice to the American people. I cannot believe that this is where we are at. But I'm gonna jump right into this. We're trying to address essentially digital authoritarianism. That's what we're contending with. So I find it ridiculous that my colleagues on the left can only and will only talk about Donald Trump as though this is not a real issue that everyday Americans, Republicans, Independents, Democrats are facing. So Ms. Richardson, while investigating these NSF grants and the NSF convergence research, was there any documentation or communication regarding the philosophical foundation of the language models being used in the AI tools?
Some of the grant descriptions themselves talk about areas that they are specifically interested in seeing, controlling, in discussing misinformation in. And these areas, some of these grants focused on election misinformation, some of them focused on vaccine misinformation. Yes.
Okay, so there was philosophical discussions about the language models themselves that these particular grant awardees would be using.
I think that a lot of these grant descriptions expressed exactly what they were going to be investigating.
Did they talk about open source language models as part of a requirement for this research?
Some of these grants they're analyzing different sets of data. Some of them wanted to do keyword searches to analyze what kinds of posts they were searching for.
But I think what we're getting at here, the heart of this, is that there was no clear guidance on the particular set of language models that they were supposed to be using. Ms. Richardson, have you been able to determine the political affiliations of the project leads?
Well, some of them, just based on what these, again, I'm just going based off of what the grants state publicly. The topics that they are considering seem to be targeting specific kinds of speech.
Okay. Now, the University of Michigan put together a slide deck that was submitted to the NSF. On the overview slide, the mission of their grant, as explained, was, quote, our misinformation service helps policymakers at social media platforms get good PR for their actions on misinformation by having a clear benchmark for outcomes and eliminating the need to defend internal procedures. Thanks. The slide deck also notes that they do things that we know work without backlash, and that, quote, we push responsibility for difficult judgments to someone outside of the company, end quote. It goes on to say, we get people off our backs for how we act on misinformation. And it goes on to say that we eliminate the need to defend specific procedures. Now, this is an NSF, taxpayer-funded project, and they say we eliminate the need to defend specific procedures as though accountability is more of a suggestion, more of a yellow light. So, Mr. Fong, Mr. Lukhanov, the NSF vision states that they, quote, strive to create a nation that leads the world in science and engineering, research and innovation to the benefit of all without barriers to participation. Given what I just told you about the University of Michigan's own worked product that was funded by US taxpayers, does it not seem like the mission of the NSF and the grants that they are funding are fundamentally at odds? And does this create concerns for the American people and the agencies for mission creep and infringement on constitutional rights? And I'm short on time, so short answers.
I think the mission of actually trying to seek out microaggressions shows a very poor, it's a very unscientific idea that we can have an AI that can make that kind of cultural decisions about politeness norms and impose it on everyone else.
Thank you.
I can't comment directly on NSF, but just generally, a lot of these groups that claim to be nonpartisan, look at their record, they become partisan. They claim to represent science, they end up representing a corporate interest. They claim to be supporting and upholding facts, end up censoring true and accurate information. We just need a lot better guardrails for this type of thing, and a lot better disclosure.
I appreciate that. I yield.
Now yields.
Reserve.
The gentleman from South Carolina reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
I'm going to reserve because I know you have a lot of speakers.
The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Cammack.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague, Representative Duncan. I rise in support of H.R. 7176, the Unlocking Our Domestic LNG Potential Act of 2024. This bill is a pivotal piece of legislation that will bolster the United States' energy security, foster economic growth, and promote environmental sustainability. At its core, this bill will streamline the regulatory process for LNG exports and unleash the full potential of America's abundant natural gas resources. This bill reverses the disastrous Biden administration's extreme liquefied gas export permit ban. And I know how much the left loves that word extreme. They are the very definition of it. This bill also presents a strategic opportunity for the United States to fortify its energy independence. By facilitating the exportation of LNG, we reduce our reliance on foreign energy sources, mitigate geopolitical risks, and improve U.S. national security. The bill creates new jobs, stimulates investment in energy infrastructure, and fosters innovation across related industries. Increasing LNG exports will expand markets, bolster domestic production, and increase economic growth. This bill will also provide cleaner, more environmentally friendly energy options for our partners and our allies. And it's important that they know where we stand and that they can depend and trust us during these times. This bill also supports global efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while increasing global energy security. My home state of Florida plays a pivotal role in the broader landscape of U.S. LNG exports, with Jacksport serving as a hub for LNG expansion and development. Jacksport is the only port on the East Coast to offer on-dock and near-dock LNG fueling capabilities. I urge all of my colleagues who care about national security to get on board with this bill. With that, I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Florida yields. The gentleman from South Carolina.
A little bit. I've been up since 4. So
yeah, exactly. Good afternoon,
punchy.
everybody. Thank you for joining us here at SUPERCUT. I'm with the wonderful Congresswoman Cammack, who got up at 4 a.m. to catch a flight to be here today. So thank you very much for being here with us today.
Absolutely. This is great.
So 1 year ago, we were here in the same place on the same stage, and you were just getting started with your work on the subcommittee for the weaponization of the federal government in the House.
Yes.
So I wanted to make sure that we gave the audience an update on the work that you've been doing over the past year, because really the weaponization of the federal government is an assault on people's constitutional rights. So maybe just give an overview of what you're doing, and then we can get into the details.
Yeah, absolutely. So how many people here feel that the government has gotten way too big? Okay. How many people feel that the government has abused its powers against everyday American citizens? Yeah. I mean, there's a pretty much general consensus that there's a problem happening in the country where these unelected, nameless, faceless bureaucrats think that they all of a sudden have the power to take on everyday American citizens and strip them of their constitutional rights. And so for the last year, under the leadership of Chairman Jim Jordan, who y'all just saw, wasn't Jim great? He's amazing. We have been tackling all the various aspects of weaponization of federal government, and it's everything from the Ukrainian intelligence service, which is directing the FBI to take down your social media posts, or a bank giving up your financial information to the FBI to search for key terms that would indicate that you are a radical individual. For example, if you shop at Bass Pro or at Cabela's, I guess that makes me a radical. But that is the type of work that we've been undertaking, and one of the key areas that has just really emerged is this nexus between AI and censorship. And this is where we dig into the industrial censorship complex. And I think that's one way to really encapsulate the work that we've done, is really defining and digging into this new era of the industrial censorship complex, where big government and big tech work hand in glove to take away your constitutional rights. And the Democrats, They don't think that this is happening. Every single person in this room just said that they think that government's too big and that there's a problem and it's weaponized. And the Democrats think, no, it's not a problem.
So is it that the Democrats don't think it's happening, or it's that the Democrats are fine with it and they see it as a tool to use for their political purposes to continue their control? Because Democrats and the left like government. We've seen through the Biden administration and through the Obama administration before that they are perfectly fine with using the federal government against their political opponents. So is it that they don't know about it, or that they deny so that they can then use it to their advantage?
So we all know that the Democrat agenda, the liberal progressive agenda, it's nothing more than dependency and control. They want to grow the size of government so that we become dependent on all their big government programs so that they can then, of course, maintain control. So when it comes to the weaponization committee, without fail, those on the left, all they want to talk about is how it's a sham, that there's no weaponization of government. Oh, and Donald Trump is bad. That's what they want to talk about. They are so obsessed with Donald Trump that they will do anything possible to make sure that he is not the nominee or the 47th president of the United States. Their obsession is real. And it is just unbelievable that they are so blind with hate that that's all they can focus on. They can't see that right in front of you, regardless of whether you're a Republican or Democrat, this is a real problem where everyday rights of Americans are being stripped away, and they're doing nothing in stopping it or trying to tackle it.
So we have a constitution for a reason. People still do have constitutional rights.
Yes.
But as we continue to move into a completely digital society, whether it's online with information that we consume or with banking, you said it as an example. You know, I shop at Bass Pro. I shop at Cabela's. Through the coverage of your committee and the work that you guys do in the reporting, you know, they're flagging things like Bibles as extremist sales, which is a violation of the First Amendment. And then, of course, the search and seizure without the warrants, which is not just limited to Bass Pro and Cabela's. The FBI has been doing hundreds of thousands of searches illawfully for years now. So how do Americans fight back against this kind of invasion and violation of their rights, especially when it's very difficult to see it happening when you have these federal government agencies like the Treasury Department, for example, and computers that you're not seeing the action on until much later, years later? You know, how are you working to combat this from happening in the first place? Because it seems like it's like guilty until proven innocent kind of thing. Like they do it and then you find out about it later and there's no recourse.
No, I mean, it really does kind of feel like you're in a twilight zone. Like, to your point, you're guilty until proven innocent. And so one of the things that we're doing, and I think Chairman Jordan alluded to this, is some of the legislative fixes, ensuring that your First Amendment right is there, it's protected, and that you have a right to free speech. One of the very, very troubling things, though, is that you could walk up to an average member of Congress, and unlikely that they could outline the 5 tenets of the First Amendment. That is very scary, because these are the people who have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution. And so one thing that we have done is the legislative element, which I will add, one piece of legislation that we're working on in our office is called a fencing bill. We know the challenges that we face in the government funding battles. I mean, no sooner than a week from now, we will probably be looking down the barrel of a government shutdown over a spending battle. So until we can get an attitude adjustment, a very much-needed attitude adjustment in Washington, we have a more clever way of figuring out how we can hold these unelected swamp creatures accountable, and that's by fencing their money. Mm-hmm. If we can't cut their money, we're going to fence it. And people are like, well, what would that do? Well, you start in different departments and you hold their money hostage. Two can play this game, and I am so sick and tired, and I know you guys are too, of sitting on the sidelines and watching these people run roughshod over our rights with our money. Mm-hmm. And they treat it like their money. It's our money. It's crazy.
So I'm so glad that you brought up the fencing and the strategy behind holding bureaucrats accountable, because that's exactly it. It's bureaucrats who are faceless, nameless, no accountability for them in these agencies, who happen to mostly be leftists working in the federal government who think they can violate the rights of everyday Americans for the sake of whatever cause they're pushing. So we've seen this issue of big tech partnering with big government, whether it's the White House, whether it's the federal government, other areas, also state governments, for example. Oh, yeah. But now we're moving into this new phase. I was in San Francisco a couple weeks ago,
I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Did you
I was only driving through, thank God.
Oh, wait, I have to ask, did you download the poop?
I did not, because I was just only driving through, but it was risky. It was risky. But all the billboards were about AI. And your committee, the Weaponization Committee, just came out with this alarming, almost 100-page report about how the National Institute of Science Foundation, which is a federal government-funded program, is using taxpayer money to work with academia to censor information online, quote, at scale. So talk about this new partnership that has been unveiled, and you've just been appointed to a new commission to work on AI, a bipartisan commission, actually. So talk about the dangers of AI and the way that the government is already working through grants, through money, to use it to, quote, censor at scale.
No, it's really terrifying what we're seeing. And so to your point about this new commission that's been formed, we just actually this week announced the new Congressional AI Task Force. And this is really important because I don't know if you guys have seen in the news here in the last week, Microsoft rolled out their new AI platform, and you ask it a question, something as simple as, paint me a picture of a 16th century king from England. And it gives you a guy in dreads and, like, it's ridiculous. The front page of the New York Post had a great front cover that talked about how the Pope was a woman, and it is just riddled with DEI BS. And why it's that way is because of the language model. And so what we're doing on the task force is we are ensuring that the language models come from a liberty perspective. Because if you start with garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. And I think there's tremendous potential when it comes to AI. But what does an average American do? What do organizations do? What do organizations or municipalities, cities, counties, what do they do if there's massive election interference at scale because of AI? There's very little recourse. So there has to be some guiding frameworks put in place. But we don't want to overreact like government typically does and drive the innovation out. Because I do see a tremendous opportunity for us to do incredible things using AI. Yeah. But we have to be cognizant of the dangers around it. And if we don't get this right, we could be staring down the barrel of mass censorship at scale like we saw at Stanford, at MIT, at University of Michigan. And I'll give a quick example. The system that was awarded for MIT with their AI initiative, it said in their findings that they were utilizing AI to reprogram veterans, rural Americans, and people who had a conservative mindset because we couldn't handle truth. And so they were literally using AI to try to reprogram conversations and mindsets and facts. That's dangerous. That's incredibly dangerous. And so I think we have a lot of work to do. We're right at the beginning of where AI is going to be implemented in every single aspect of our life. So we've got to make sure we don't stifle innovation, but we also got to make sure that we are protecting our national security and we're protecting people's constitutional rights.
Essentially, it just has to evolve, right? AI is technology that is evolving, and as we've seen through COVID, through the 2020 election with Hunter's laptop and Twitter, Facebook censoring the lab leak theory for months on end while conservative media outlets were accurately reporting on where that virus came from. So this is happening at an even higher level. And like you said, George Washington was put into this AI system at Microsoft, and the real George Washington did not come out of that. And essentially, they've basically erased all white males from the entire system. And so outside of government, would you encourage private companies to go into this AI space and to hire liberty-minded voices? Because like you said, if you're only hiring people in San Francisco for this AI, it's garbage in, garbage out. You're not going to have any kind of different opinion when it comes to the result.
Absolutely. And I would encourage people who are in the startup space who tend to shy away from it because you have these massive competitors in Google, in Apple, Microsoft, all these people that are playing in this space. And when you start talking to them about a language model that has a philosophical base in freedom and liberty and diversity of thought rather than the traditional DEI check the box mentality, right? It's basically the equivalent of trying to explain Hayek to Stalin. So I know some of my history nerds got that. Appreciate it. Thank you. It makes me feel better. But it's crazy that we are not encouraging these startups to get in the space, because there are so many talented voices that need to be in the space, and they're getting shut out. And you can see the big players getting involved with government because they want to regulate where they can keep competition away. They want to regulate where they can control it, and that's what we have to push back against.
So we have about a minute and a half left here. Just on the issue, going back to the constitutional rights aspect, because it's so important, and as I said, you guys keep finding new things all the time on what the government is doing to backdoor all of these ways they can go around the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, all the amendments. And so, you're in the House, there's a slim margin, Senate is controlled by Chuck Schumer. So how do you get this legislation that you were discussing into a form that can be passed so that they can hold these bureaucrats accountable for what they've been doing?
I think, one, it comes down to, you had asked earlier about what can everyday Americans do. I think getting involved, and you guys are here, so you're involved, but getting more people involved and educated about this, and then communicating with your members of Congress is critical. The power of the people is unrealized, quite frankly, and untapped. Because let me tell you, there is nothing that a career politician fears more than a group of people who are motivated, educated, and activated. They are absolute cowards if they roll into their office and their phone lines are ringing off the hook with someone saying, hey, I don't want you to vote for this bill, or hey, I want you to co-sponsor this bill. That is the power of the people that has really not been activated in ways we have seen yet. So that's one thing. But then in getting that across the finish line, there's some creative strategic things we can do through the appropriations process. I am all for single-issue bills, and I would love for us to get back to that point where
what about pulling grants from groups?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the oversight element, 100%. Single-issue bills where you have members of Congress on record saying, no, I don't want more oversight. I don't want people to know where all their money is going. Put these people on the record and expose them for the cowards that they are. We need to reassert our authority as the people and in Congress.
All right. Well, on that note, Congresswoman Kat Cammack, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, SUPEC, for having us, and keep up the great work.
From your lips, guys.
Congresswoman Cammack. Yeah.
What, no quips, no nothing?
Yeah, it's a true Florida woman. Yeah.
That's right, go Gators, baby. Well, good morning. I'm so glad to see this room filled because what we have to say today is so important. I want to make clear, as so many of my colleagues already have, that this legislation, it establishes a narrow framework to protect the United States and Americans against applications controlled by foreign adversaries. And perhaps most importantly, incentivizes divestment from adversarial nations. As has been stated here multiple times, it is not a ban. TikTok, it is not a ban. And I don't care how many times you want to put that out on social media, it's not a ban. But again, thank you for proving our point that you're manipulators. The CCP threat is very real, and sorry, I'm feeling sassy today. I know, I'm trying to rein it in. The CCP threat, it's very real, and it is very serious. Tomorrow, the Energy and Commerce Committee will hold a markup on this bill and a companion piece of legislation, the Protecting Americans' Data from Foreign Adversaries Act. A group of dedicated lawmakers have worked significantly, in depth, and collaboratively on this bill. And it cuts across both chambers and on both sides of the aisle. Lawmakers, as was pointed out, from all factions of the House and Senate are coming together because this is not political. This is about the United States sovereignty, protecting Americans, our national security, and our constitutional rights. Now, within hours of the announcement of this legislation, TikTok, who just happens to be the most public forward-facing entity, which again, this isn't against TikTok specifically, but any app that is owned by a foreign adversary, they came out with a statement calling it a ban, which as we have pointed out and corrected the record, it is not, and claimed that they would be fighting for Americans' First Amendment rights. Thank you, TikTok, for proving our point. You are manipulators, you don't tell the truth, and you damn sure don't give one iota about Americans' constitutional rights. The irony of the CCP claiming to stand up for Americans' First Amendment rights is definitely the joke of the century. They seem to have forgotten that they not only steal Americans' data, violate their Fourth Amendment rights regularly, but also violate Americans' First Amendment rights daily. The data proves it, and I invite members of the press to review the data that we have here. I know several of my colleagues have talked about these points, about how there's suppression of different content that doesn't align with the CCP, how it's amplified or suppressed. I'll give you some very specific numbers. When the Hong Kong protests were at their peak, there was a 180-to-1 ratio on Instagram versus TikTok. On Instagram, the hashtag Hong Kong protest was generating 132,000 hashtags. On TikTok, 762 in the exact same time period. Now, there's, on any other issue, pick Taylor Swift, whatever, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. You can see how that is completely out of whack. On COVID blame, over a 400-to-1 ratio. If you were to type in China virus, hashtag China virus, on Instagram, there were 79,353 on Instagram, 0 to be found on TikTok. When it came to Tiananmen, shock. When it came to the hashtag Tiananmen or Tiananmen Square, on Instagram, you could find in the exact same time frame 74,334 hashtags stating Tiananmen Square. On TikTok, 1,290. It goes on and on. You can see the data. It is in black and white. And I encourage you guys to share this, because while TikTok is going to try to sell an emotional appeal that they are out here defending Americans' rights, we know that they are turning content creators into foot soldiers. That is what this is about. This is a Chinese communist-controlled company complaining that they won't have unfettered access to Americans' private data, geolocations, metadata, and contacts. Remember, this is a CCP-controlled company claiming to stand up for constitutional rights while simultaneously engaging in slavery and horrific human rights abuses. We cannot forget that. And for anyone who is confused about the long-term goal, about foreign adversaries utilizing apps in America, it is so in this case specifically, China is looking to build a language model for their AI platforms to be able to use it to dictate U.S. policy. Everything that we have seen up to this point has been a beta test. That is not a conspiracy theory. The data, it speaks for itself. I never in my lifetime would have ever thought that I would be seeing Americans reading Osama bin Laden's letter to America and making excuses and apologizing and doing the bidding of our adversaries. If you think that's a coincidence, you're not paying attention. So again, make no mistake, this evidence, it is clear, it is damning. The CCP has golden shares in ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, and while this is not singularly about one company, and it is not a ban, they love to be front and center on this issue, so they've opened that door. The harder that they try to salvage their ability to infiltrate our phones and our communities and the lives of 150 million Americans plus, the more clear it will become. For them, this is not about being profitable. We know that that's Meta's goal. It's not about the money. It is about access and it is about control. The CCP and the companies they control are pissed off that they will no longer have unfettered access, and today is when it stops. So thank you for being here, and thank you to my colleagues for all your hard work on this.
Thank you. And finally, from
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we take a stand against the Chinese Communist Party and their efforts to turn content creators in America into foot soldiers for the CCP. You know, we aren't banning a company as the high-paid lobbyist for ByteDance, which is owned by China, would lead you to believe. We aren't infringing on constitutionally protected speech or growing the size of government. All we're saying is break up with the Chinese Communist Party. As a constitutional conservative, I don't want my government or big tech to have unfettered access to my private data. So why in the hell would we want and allow the Chinese Communist Party to have access to our private data? The CCP is an adversary of the United States, and this legislation narrowly, thoughtfully, and directly addresses the national security threat and protecting Americans' data and, by extension, their First Amendment rights. Because let us not pretend for 1 second that TikTok is not infringing on our amendment, our First Amendment rights. I would say that this bill, as Representative Roy from Texas said, this bill is about conduct, not content.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Conduct, not content. And there is no restriction mentioned on content in this bill.
Gentlelady's time has
but I will
expired.
mention,
Does the
Mr. Speaker, I
gentlelady
will
from Washington
mention
reserve?
that the espionage is not covered or protected as one of the five tenets of the First Amendment.
Recognized? The gentlewoman from Washington, you have 1 minute and 3/4 time left, and I now recognize the gentleman from Kentucky.
For 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all our witnesses for appearing before the committee today. We're in the home stretch. I'm going to start with you, Ms. Colon. In your report to Congress for 2022, you reported that you had 4,634 total resolutions, correct?
Maybe. It sounds right. I'd have to go back and look at the data, but probably.
Okay. But of the 4,634 total resolutions, you listed cases that you did not have jurisdiction over as a resolution.
Yes.
Okay. So in fact, of the 4,634 total resolutions you reported, 2,217 of those cases you either lacked jurisdiction or declined to take the jurisdiction over, correct?
Maybe. I'd have to go back and look at the data, but I can certainly confirm that for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think my math's right on that.
Okay.
But just want to make sure. So it comes out that about 47%, 47.8%, nearly half of the reported total resolutions to Congress are cases that the center decided that they cannot investigate because of jurisdiction issues. So why are half of your total resolutions being reported to Congress as, quote, resolutions, when by definition, nothing was resolved, and you're not even investigating or taking steps to resolve those cases?
So I think it's important to distinguish between those cases that we decline jurisdiction and then those cases that we don't have jurisdiction, right? So a case that we don't have jurisdiction might be like a local high school. And while we are not going through an entire investigation, we are referring that back. And so we do have to track that, right, for the federal government and for others. For the cases that we decline jurisdiction, there is a considerable amount of work that is done in order to get us to that place. Many times in a declination of jurisdiction, it may be that we're sending that back to an NGB after we've decided or determined what the membership may look like, or after we've done an initial inquiry to figure out, what the details of that case are. So we do track that for that reason, because it's not as simple as saying, oh, we're moving this along and we do nothing.
But at the same time, though, I mean, that it's exceptionally misleading. At the very least, you could say it is very misleading. I mean, that's basically the equivalent of a sheriff in one county stacking up another county's crime statistics and counting it as his own as a resolution. I think even clarifying, I mean, reporting to Congress, it's a very serious matter. That right there should be clarified, because clearly these aren't resolutions and they're being counted as such. And so the statistics and the data are painting a picture that is not accurate, is I think the point we're getting to. So I think maybe labeling is a concern that we have, and that needs to be clarified, that needs to be addressed. And I guess moving forward, would you at the center commit to removing cases that you don't have jurisdiction over as resolution before reporting the statistics to Congress, because it paints a skewed picture?
So that's what we're actually working on right now, right? So as part of this top to bottom review, we're also taking a very close look at how we manage data and what those systems are internally to better be able to tell a story, right? Because at the end of the day, they are a lot of numbers, right? But we're not really sharing or kind of explaining well, like what a trend looks like. And so that's a big piece of what we're focused on right now.
When will that be complete?
It's a long process. So right now, we just hired a data engineer about 6 weeks ago to help us sort of figure out where the issues were. And so we anticipate that that's probably like an 8-month process. So
how about we say by the end of the year this is cleared up? Because in Congress, people just like to work on things and then it never gets solved. So how about we say at the end of the year we have an actual definitive change in the way that these are labeled?
We will do our best.
We're going to hold you accountable to that.
Yes, you can hold me accountable for us doing our best. Yes.
Well, our best doesn't satisfy that, but we'll bring you back if that's the case. I'm going to shift, Ms. Shim. Thank you for appearing before the committee today. Do you have anything to say about the total number of resolutions that are reported to the center? And if cases does not take jurisdiction, should they be included? Can you weigh in on this?
Yes, I share your sentiment that it is misleading, and it's confusing for us as NGBs, as well as claimants and respondents. I also may quickly take this opportunity to raise another concern that we have, that we're seeing a trend, an uptick in what's called informal resolutions, which is another a path where the Center for Safe Sport does not investigate, rather they call the respondent, and if the respondent takes responsibility and acknowledges that they may be engaged in misconduct or they are apologetic, that they will then close the case in an informal resolution, which in our opinion is not a resolution because there was no investigation. And those cases are concerning. Some of those cases are sex assault cases.
Sounds like the situation is ripe for some legislative action.
We agree. Thank you.
With that, Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. I yield.
Gentlelady yields back, and now the ranking member and I are going to take a couple more minutes for questions. Ms. Castor.
Well, thank you. And Ms. Cammack, to your point, there is a broad outreach effort.
From Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all my colleagues for going through all of these. I know it is a tremendous amount of work, and we have some serious decisions ahead of us, so I appreciate everyone's consideration. I am going to keep it short and simple. I have one amendment to offer here today. You know, keeping it simple. We all obviously all agree that this is a pretty substantial package, $95 billion being considered in foreign assistance. And over the past few years, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the United States has contributed more than $67 billion to Ukraine in its fight against Russia. Far more than that, actually. Now, I know that there's been a lengthy discussion about the type of aid. And while, by and large, there is agreement on defense-related aid, there is one area that I think deserves far more consideration and scrutiny. My amendment number 14, would simply strike the bilateral economic assistance account in this bill. Americans, every single one of us, have constituents back home that are trying to make decisions between gas and groceries. We are seeing reports where our Treasury Department is having an issue placing bonds. We are having challenges here at home that Americans quite simply can't afford to bear the brunt of those on top of that of a nation abroad. So, in the interest of keeping it short and sweet, I want to thank my colleagues who I think represent a pretty diverse cross-section of the conference, Congresswoman Bice, Congressman Alford, Congressman Bean, and Congressman Donalds for supporting me in this amendment. I think this is a common sense approach to paring this effort down. So with that, I hope and encourage my colleagues to support my amendment to strike economic aid under this package. Thank you. I yield.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, I'm not going to be as brief as she.
Flaherty, what was your official title during your time at the Biden White House?
Congresswoman, when I was at the White House, I was assistant to the president and director of digital strategy.
And that is an appointed position, correct?
It is, Congresswoman.
Okay. Now, did you take an oath to the United States Constitution when you assumed this appointment?
Yes, Congresswoman.
Perfect. And you're familiar with the First Amendment?
I am.
Can you please outline the 5 tenets of the First Amendment for me?
Congresswoman, I'm not going to be able to do it off the top of my head, but generally the First Amendment relates to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, and off the top of my head, I'm not able to recall all of the planks.
Oof, well, that's disappointing and a little embarrassing, but not surprising considering what we're dealing with here today. Now, I certainly wouldn't expect that someone who cannot outline the basic tenets of the First Amendment to uphold the Constitution, of which you took an oath to defend, but here we are today. Now, you said multiple times here that you cannot recall certain conversations, communications, correct?
Congresswoman, I left the White House almost a year ago. These discussions happened more than 2 years ago. Certainly there are a number of discussions related to this that I'm not able to recall.
Okay, so you agree that you have said multiple times here you cannot recall?
Congresswoman, yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure. And I'm so glad that we have receipts, because we have come with receipts. In fact, all of your emails from that time. So we're going to help you recall some of these conversations. On February 6, 2021, at 9:45 p.m., we love our timestamps, you emailed Twitter to demand immediate removal of a parody or imposter account linked to Biden's adult daughter. You stated, quote, "Please remove this account immediately." Then you went on to say, "I have tried using your form 3 times and it won't work. It is also ridiculous that I need to upload my ID to a form to prove that I am an authorized representative of Finnegan Biden." Now, 2 minutes later, at 9:47 p.m., Twitter responded right back to you. "Thanks for sending this over. We'll escalate for further review from here." Mr. Flaherty, do you recall this exchange?
Congresswoman, I do recall that exchange.
Okay, so you still stand by how you have handled this situation in making it clear that you needed action immediately from a social media company?
Congresswoman, the White House Office of Digital Strategy absolutely has an equity in protecting the president's grandchild from online harassment and impersonation.
Sure, I would expect nothing less, but I'm just saying there's a common theme here, right? So you then escalated a little bit more, and within that same minute, so literally 60 seconds, cannot stress the degree to which this needs to be resolved immediately. 45 minutes later, at 10:32, Twitter responded, "Here's an update. The account is now suspended." Now, the next day, February 9th, you followed up with an email to Facebook with a demand for more information and an accusation that Facebook's failure to, quote, "censor speech on its platform is causing political violence." Those are your words. Causing political violence. Do you believe that the failure to censor Americans' First Amendment, constitutionally protected speech is considered political violence?
Congresswoman, I don't remember the specific email in question. I'm happy to take a look at it and observe the context, but I don't recall what you're referencing.
Well, and I will say I am disappointed because we have presented receipts here today, but we have also shown how timely you have been in engaging at all hours of the night with social media companies during your tenure as a representative to the highest levels of the White House. Again, your words, despite the fact that earlier my colleague, Representative Gates, was trying to clarify who is we that you speak of. You say in your emails that you represent the highest levels of government in the White House. But I find it ridiculous that it took us over a year for you to appear before this committee. In fact, it was after you actually missed your deposition, refused to show up. We had you scheduled in January and then again in February of this year, and you chose not to appear. Now, is it safe to assume that in your role as the deputy campaign manager for the Joe Biden re-election campaign, that you speak on behalf of the campaign or the President of the United States?
Congresswoman, I'm here to discuss my interactions with social media companies when I worked at the White House from January 2021 until June 2023. I'm not here to discuss the campaign.
But you're basically saying that you don't speak for President Joe Biden or his campaign, and you didn't speak for him during your time at the White House. So either you have completely misrepresented your role, or you are trying everything possible to make sure that your correspondence with social media companies directly threatening, coercing these companies to silence Americans who disagreed with the political agenda of the Biden administration happened.
Congresswoman, I'll note I'm here voluntarily to discuss my discussions with social media companies while I was in the White House, and I'm happy to answer those
But a year late and a dollar short. So with that,
Simon.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan. And thank you to all of our witnesses for appearing here today. I'm just going to start going right down the line with a simple question. When a candidate campaigns for office, they make promises, correct? We'll start with you, Mr. Costello.
Correct, obviously.
Want to be a dick? Sure.
Mr. Trustee? Mr. Hamilton?
Yes.
Yes. One makes, wonderful. So I'm going to dig into what the prosecutors and plaintiffs have said about Mr. Trump. here recently. Alvin Bragg, during his campaign for New York County District Attorney, said, quote, "I am the candidate in the race who has the experience with Donald Trump. I was the chief deputy in the Attorney General's office. We sued the Trump administration over 100 times for the Muslim travel ban, for family separation at the border, for shenanigans with the census, so I know how to litigate with him," end quote. In response to another question from a reporter, Bragg said, quote, "We've got two standards of justice. Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein. Being a rich, old, white man has allowed you to evade accountability in Manhattan. That includes Trump and his children," end quote. Moving on to New York Attorney General James, during the last days of her campaign, said of Trump, quote, "Oh, we're definitely going to sue him. We're going to be a real pain in the ass," end quote. She would later go on to say, quote, "I will never be afraid to challenge this illegitimate president," end quote, and said, "What is fueling," quote, "what is fueling my soul right now is Trump," end quote. Mr. Costello, is there a financial benefit to making campaign promises?
I'm sure there is, otherwise she wouldn't have made those promises.
Mr. Trusty?
I think that's right.
Mr. Hamilton?
Correct.
Ms. Winebanks?
I'm not sure I understand the premise of your question, so I
You
can't
don't,
answer.
you cannot answer if there is a financial benefit to making campaign promises?
Making campaign promises is to win election.
You know,
I don't see that as a financial benefit.
I'm going to stick with you, Ms. Winebanks, as the Democrat witness here today. Can you answer how much money did District Attorney Alvin Bragg raise for his political reelection campaign immediately following the announcement of 34 felony counts against President Trump?
I do not know.
It's $850,000. $850,000. That's a good chunk of cash. Let's go on to the AG James. How much did she raise for her political campaign after her civil fraud case against President Trump?
I don't know, but it has nothing to do with whether the charges that she filed were based on the facts and the evidence and her
You and I
ability
both
to
know
prove
that's
them.
nonsense. Come on now.
I do not know that's nonsense. I believe it to
Not
be
a soul
true.
in this room actually believes that. And no one will ever believe that. It was $400,000. $400,000. And we will submit for the record copies of campaign emails soliciting donations. It almost seems, and I'm just stating the obvious here, that the harder they go after President Trump, the more money they stand to make. The common thread between all of these individuals, as well as the other cases that President Trump faces, is that many of the prosecutors suing Trump either have a personal vendetta or they seek to gain fame and money from it. This isn't hard. Those of us here today, we understand politics and what it takes to run a successful political operation. Traditionally, you want to drain your opponent's resources, drive up their negatives in the polls, and you want to keep them from engaging with voters. Now, I'm going to ask the million-dollar question here. What better way to do that than to charge your opponent with 91 counts, force them to spend millions on a legal defense, and tie them up in court to keep them off of the campaign trail? It's almost like this is a plan. This is a strategy that is employed in campaigns all around the country, but we are seeing it at the highest levels today. Of course, as an incumbent, you have an added advantage of using taxpayer-funded offices and agencies and officials, and we all know that you can never go up against the federal government because it is an endless stream of resources. Isn't that correct, Mr. Costello?
Without a doubt.
Exactly. If that is not what lawfare is, I don't know what is. Lawfare, by definition, is exactly that, utilizing the law to take down your political opponents. It is an abuse of power. Mr. Trusty, you said earlier a pretty chilling statement that you fear we have, quote, crossed the Rubicon, that the ends now justify the means. I feel like many Americans agree with you. Heck, if it weren't for double standards, I feel like our Democrat colleagues in this administration wouldn't have standards at all. But I feel that the credibility of our institution is at stake here because, to your point, the ends somehow have justified the means. You know, I've pulled some research out of a Harvard Law study that suggests that district attorneys pursue crimes and longer sentences at higher rates during election years. So while DA Bragg and AG James' terms end in 26 and 27 respectively, and of course DA Willis is facing re-election this fall, is it crazy to question whether any of these prosecutors are weighing their reelection efforts in their choice as they pursue President Trump. Final word to you, Mr. Treston.
Right. It's certainly not crazy, and I think that there's evidence that supports that conclusion. And again, I never get to the money part. If you're a prosecutor, you're not supposed to be a politician. You're not supposed to announce your target first and then search for an inventive way to charge them with heretofore unknown crimes in a lot of cases. So that's the problem for me, is not chasing down all the politics of how they stand to gain, but that as a prosecutor, you have a sacred obligation to pursue evidence, not people.
Absolutely, a predetermined outcome.
Correct.
Thank you to our witnesses for appearing. My time has expired. I yield.
Recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am, first and foremost, very, very sorry, Ms. Malinowski. As the wife of a SWAT medic from one wife to another, I am deeply apologetic, and I can't even begin to understand the pain and suffering that you and your family are going through. My husband, as I said, who is a SWAT medic, when we heard about this case, he was so thoroughly disgusted and heartbroken. That is truly, I believe, not a reflection on the good men and women in law enforcement that intend to do their jobs the best they can, and we are so very sorry. Mr. Chairman, I am also deeply disappointed that the discussion today has been centered around ways to restrict constitutional rights to law-abiding citizens instead of the mental health crisis that we face in this country, which is a massive driver of crime in this country. Also, very little has been talked about when we're discussing the overgrown, overly aggressive, and woefully inadequate administrative state. And so with that, I'm going to jump right into Mr. Kleckner. Thank you for returning back to Congress to provide testimony. And in a March 10th, 2023 Judiciary Subcommittee on the administrative state, you addressed the ATF stabilizing rule, brace rule. In your testimony, you said, quote, "This rule effectively gives the ATF the power to determine who is a felon by the stroke of a bureaucrat's pen. This is not an appropriate enforcement of law. It is tyranny," end quote. And I agree with you. What is sad is that in this rule, we are seeing a microcosm of what is happening at other federal agencies. The American people are under assault by the Biden administration's regulatory regime from all corners of the federal government. That is why I introduced the REINS Act. As many of you know, the bill would address regulatory overreach by requiring every new major rule proposed by federal agencies be approved by Congress before going into effect. This is the reassertion of Article 1 authority that is how the Founding Fathers intended, not unelected, nameless, faceless bureaucrats arbitrarily dictating law. After all, we know that Americans pay $2 trillion a year in additional compliance costs, economic loss for this aggressive regulatory regime. The stabilizing brace rule and ATF zero tolerance policy are prime examples of regulations that not only impose compliance costs on firearm retailers, but infringe on Americans' basic Second Amendment rights. So I'm going to go down the line, and I'm going to come right back to you. Mr. Cummins, yes or no, should federal agencies be able to shift criminal statutes and rewrite law?
No.
Thank you. Ms. Sampson.
That's not what happened here. They're enforcing.
I did not ask that. I asked for a yes or no. Should federal agencies be arbitrarily able to write law?
No, and that's not what happened here.
Thank you. Mr. Graham.
No, Congresswoman.
Mr. Kleckner.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Kleckner, my understanding is that this rule disregards ATF's own approval of stabilizing braces in 2012, correct?
This current zero tolerance policy rule? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Regarding how they classified the pistol braces as an accessory, therefore not subject to full ATF regulatory standards.
Right.
So in the time since they approved them in 2012 to today, ATF has done a full 180 on the issue and has chosen to impose erroneous regulations on firearm accessories that were originally intended for disabled veterans, correct?
That's true, and upon which people relied upon their opinion when they were acting, and they're now in trouble for.
Absolutely. And the owners of these firearms would now be committing a felony if they did not register, surrender, or destroy the accessory.
Correct, which means their right to even possess a firearm for the rest of their life is now gone.
Exactly. Did Congress ever approve this legislatively?
No, ma'am.
Can you quickly outline the specific penalties for failing to register a pistol brace under this rule?
Quickly, yes, felony.
Financial as well?
Oh, for sure. Defending yourself, financial costs, losing the right to protect yourself or have firearms in the future, all those things.
Right. And so now that this rule is being litigated in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, considering the rule has criminal implications, can you speak to the risks associated with circumventing the legislative process in this case?
The risks now going forward, or even companies don't know what they're supposed to do because it changes back and forth so many times. I think people are afraid, as someone said earlier, about what they're supposed to do, what they're going to get in trouble with, whose guidance they're supposed to follow. It's all unclear.
I appreciate that, and I know my time is expiring. I have a list of questions for you, Mr. Graham, that I will submit for the record, but I think it is clear that what we are seeing today, particularly under the ATF, is a gross overreach, a weaponization of the federal government in its true form. It's something that I think Republicans, Democrats, and all Americans should be equally concerned about. With that, I yield.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Wyoming is right.
Chairman of the Federal Elections Commission sent you a letter regarding the FCC proposed regulations on AI in political advertisements. Now, in the letter, Chairman Cooksey stated that the FCC lacks the legal authority to promulgate conflicting disclaimers requirements only for political communications. He also stated that it would create confusion and disarray among political campaigns. Now, have you spoken to Chair Cooksey about this proposal, and do you plan to move forward following the FEC's concerns about the authority and political speech? And I apologize, I'm in 3 conflicting hearings today, so if this has been asked, I appreciate you answering it again.
First of all, I believe in transparency. I believe every single consumer should know if AI is being used. I think it is good for truth, honesty, and safety that every single one of us knows if AI is being used. I spoke to the vice chair of the FEC, who thinks that we have complementary authority here, because since 1930, the FCC has been requiring campaigns, when they advertise on television and radio, to file with us what ad they put up, when it ran, and how much they paid for it. In 1974, Congress asked cable authorities to do that, and then in 1992,
I asked if you spoke with the chair, not the vice chair.
I have only spoken to the vice chair, but the
So
truth
the chair
is we
and the
have
vice
a
chair
long
have differing
history.
opinions on this.
Since 1930, we've been collecting this data in our files.
No, I'm not trying to be adversarial. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this. So,
Fair.
so there's
I've spoken to the vice
there's a
chair.
disconnect between the chair and the vice chair over at the FEC.
Yeah, they have a difference of opinion. The vice chair says that clearly we have complementary authority in this area. I agree with that.
So what is the plan? Because we are less than 5 months out from a significant election.
Totally.
And
I agree with you. but
all
what
of
I
us
have
being
proposed-
candidates,
let's
in
talk
addition.
Let's talk about what I've proposed, because I feel like this conversation isn't about that. What I've proposed is a rulemaking, a proposal that we collect public comment on whether or not advertisements that are run on our televisions and radios should just disclose if they use AI. I think
you actually-
disclosure.
I think by and large.
The gentlelady's asking a question.
Yeah,
Gentlelady from Florida.
I don't think that requires a whole comment period, because by and large, everyone wants transparency, right? It's a matter of, does the FCC have authority to do so? So,
we have,
Commissioner Carr,
wait a
can
second,
you
we
weigh in
have
on this,
laws
please?
since 19.
Hold on, I gotta limit
No,
my
the
time.
gentlelady
Allow-
from Florida has the floor to ask a question.
Proposal that would have the FCC mark a monumental sea change in the regulation of political speech on the eve of a national election is as unlawful as it is misguided. As the chairman of the FEC has made clear, Congress has given them exclusive authority with respect to disclosures involving political ads. Moreover, the FCC can only muddy the waters here. It would put in place a proposal that applies only to an ad on broadcast TV, but you could see the same ad online or on cable, and it wouldn't have the disclosure. That's going to leave consumers less informed, perhaps more confused than they are today. So I think the FCC should abandon this proposal, because it could only move forward right on the eve of an election. This is an important debate, the use of AI, no doubt, but that debate should be happening here in Congress, and it is happening at the FEC as well. It's just not a job for the FCC right now.
I don't know why we're so
I'm sorry, I have to
The gentlelady
reclaim
from
my
Florida
time
is
here.
asking the question and has
So-
the floor.
Chairwoman, I got to jump to another issue. Thank you, Commissioner Carr, for that feedback. The 4.9 gigahertz band, as we know, very, very important. First responders, public safety. Want to get to a timeline for making a decision on whether this band will be reallocated to FirstNet or it will be auctioned. Do we have that?
We have an open docket on that. We're taking in comment from all kinds of public safety authorities right now. To be clear, it is not a question of whether it will go to FirstNet or be auctioned. It's a question of what public safety authorities might be managing these airwaves going forward.
Timeline?
My hope is that we can do this within the next several months, but boy, lots of people are filing a lot of stuff before us, and when it comes at us fast and furious, we have to spend some time looking at it and reading it carefully.
There's a lot more that I wish I could get to. I wish you guys could see my notes here, or maybe not, I'm not sure. But I want to leave us in the last 22 seconds with this. I agree with you, Commissioner Carr, that this could severely muddy the waters when we're talking about AI. While I agree wholeheartedly that we need transparency and clarity about the use of AI in political advertisements, the FEC has jurisdiction over this issue. And the fact that there are divided opinions, conflicting opinions within the FCC that you have not spoken to the chair of the FEC is concerning. So with that, my time has expired, and Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you. The gentlelady's time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York who is waving.
And it is because we are Gators. Yes, I have. Go Gators. Thank you, Chairman Bilirakis, and thank you to our witnesses who are appearing before us today. As you can see, we are ready for football season, despite it being 109 degrees here in Washington, D.C. Ms. Khan, I'm going to start with you, and I apologize if these questions have been asked. I am in 3 competing hearings at the same time, so my apologies. Ms. Khan, according to the Office of Personnel Management, 87% of surveyed FTC employees agreed that senior agency officials maintained high standards of integrity and honesty. In 2021, this percentage plummeted to 53% and dropped further to 47% in 2022. This is all under your leadership. Why, under your leadership, has this number continued to decline?
Thanks, Congresswoman, and let me just say it's such an honor to serve alongside the talented and dedicated staff of the FTC. Those numbers have actually increased. The FTC this past year was among the 10 best places to work among mid-sized government agencies, and we'll continue to identify additional ways that we can make sure we're able to recruit and maintain the best talent. One source of complaint that we hear a lot about is pay. We know that we can't compete with private sector pay, but increasingly we also can't compete with pay of other federal agencies like the Federal Reserve, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Securities and Exchange Commission. And so one way that, I think Congress could be really helpful is actually putting the FTC's pay scale on parity with the pay scale of the financial regulators.
So in 2021 and then in 2022, it dropped in half. Right. And then you say it's coming back up. Is that because those that have been dissatisfied with your leadership have since left rather than some radical turnaround happening at the agency? And I'll use that as a segue because in the same vein, your former colleague, Commissioner Christine Wilson, outlined concerns about your leadership in a 2023 Wall Street Journal editorial. And one example she used was the FTC challenge to Meta's acquisition of the virtual reality gaming company Within. Now, Ms. Wilson said, quote, "Consider the FTC's challenge to Meta's acquisition of Within, a virtual reality gaming company. Before joining the FTC, Ms. Khan, you argued that Meta should be blocked from making any future acquisitions and wrote a report on the same issues as a congressional staffer. She would now sit as a purportedly impartial judge and decide whether Meta can acquire Within. Spurning due process considerations and federal ethics obligations, my Democratic colleagues on the commission affirmed Ms. Khan's decision not to recuse herself," end quote. Ms. Khan, you investigated Meta as counsel for the House Judiciary Committee as a congressional staffer, correct?
That's correct.
Now, would your remarks towards Meta and your investigative history against the company not be grounds for recusal from the case?
So the federal ethics laws require recusal if you have financial conflicts of interest. So if you own huge amounts of Facebook stock, for example, or if you have close family ties to Facebook. I have neither of those. And so I followed the standard that was laid out that ultimately led me to conclude that I was not required to recuse. As a general matter, I think there's been a broad recognition that dominant technology companies have been able to get away with gobbling up a lot of their competitors, and that we need to be more vigilant. And I've been really pleased at the FTC that we've been scrutinizing these dominant technology companies when they're making acquisitions that we have reason to believe might violate the law.
But as you laid out, you said you followed that to the letter of the law, right? That the ethics guidelines say that as long as you don't have any stocks, right, or financial obligations or considerations with that company, that makes it okay, despite the fact that you investigated them, were critical, derogatory even, in your work against Meta previously, and then now you're supposed to be impartial. I mean, by the standard of as long as you don't have financial obligations or an interest, I mean, heck, half of Congress, I mean, Speaker Emeritus Pelosi has financial ties and stocks with all these companies, and yet here we are making laws, which is why I think it should be prohibited that members of Congress own individual stocks of companies personally. But if you were faced with a similar case with a company that you had investigated as a staffer or made disparaging remarks about, in the future, would you consider recusing yourself? Because the optics are pretty damning. Don't you agree?
Congressman, I would just disagree with that characterization. I had certain expertise in certain markets, and I think that's what contributed to my being appointed in this role. And I think it would be really dangerous if we allowed companies that accumulate a lot of economic and political power to start picking and choosing which enforcers get to oversee them and which enforcers don't. And so I followed to the letter the legal standard that says if you have made up your mind entirely about the facts and the law, then you should recuse yourself. But if not, there's no requirement. I think we need to keep the bigger picture in mind as well.
Well, and I know my time has expired, but just yes or no, do you believe that the current concentrated app marketplace is fair for consumers and developers? Yes or no?
Congressman, certainly we've heard a lot of concerns about that concentration. There are lawsuits that have been filed, including by our colleagues at the Justice Department.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually want to follow up on my colleague from Florida and his line of questioning. As Representative Gates pointed out, the judge's daughter significantly profited from this case, to the tune actually of $93 million raised for her Democrat clients that include a member of this committee, Representative Goldman, I should point out and put on the record. But also authentic campaigns, of which Lauren Mershon, the daughter of the judge, she runs this firm, Authentic Campaigns, and was paid nearly $12 million for her work this cycle for her Democrat clients, and including $9.7 million by the Biden-Harris campaign. Now, I know that there's been a tremendous amount of discussion today about the severe irregularities of the case, some of the things surrounding jury instructions, but I want to talk about the financial motivations for the DA and the judge. So Judge Wilson, you just said that he got a waiver from Judicial Ethics Committee, and you were pointing out how just the appearance of any impropriety, it's to be taken very seriously. Can you talk about the Judicial Ethics Committee, who makes up that committee, and what are some of the processes that they would use? Would they consider the $93 million or her clients or a direct immediate relative that is benefiting financially from this case?
If you're asking me who makes up the committee, it's a combination of lawyers and judges who are selected by the Appellate Division of New York to hear issues that judges bring to them, asking whether or not they can act ethically in particular circumstances. I myself availed myself of that committee on several instances. When it comes to whether or not they should consider the amount of the contributions, I actually think the amount of the contributions are irrelevant because, as you recall, I said Judge Mershon shouldn't have made any contribution in any small amount to political campaigns. That's based upon a prohibition of judges being involved in political activities except if they're in a window period during their own campaign. At that time, then, a judge's campaign may make a contribution to another campaign or to another political organization. But that's a strict requirement that it only be during an election when such a campaign is made. No, it doesn't matter so much what the amount of the money that was being made. It matters that this is someone of first degree of relationship to the judge who is profiting from activities that oppose the defendant before that judge. And even if he had an ethics opinion exonerating him, saying, it's okay, your daughter's not a witness, and none of her interests are being tried here, so the ethics committee thought it was just fine, there's still an appearance of impropriety that's of great concern to the public in general, and that's what a judge wants to avoid when you're hearing a case. You don't want people to feel that your integrity and that your impartiality is being impacted.
Is compromised, right? Which,
and that's what happened here.
And the judge himself had given contributions, and I think you pointed out very appropriately that it doesn't matter if it was a large or small contribution, but the judge in this case, Judge Merchan, he contributed to a political action committee called Stop Republicans. That is inappropriate, correct? I mean, especially overseeing the case of the Republican nominee on the ticket, correct?
He should have known better to make those contributions while a sitting judge.
Right, and I mean, and I see our Democrat witness, Mr. Wu, you're shaking your head. I'm glad that you agree with us that this is a tremendous question mark on the integrity of this trial. But, you know, I also want to talk a little bit about DA Bragg. Now, I pointed out in our previous hearing that DA Bragg raised $850,000 in campaign contributions immediately upon the announcement of the 34 counts. Mr. Fahey, have you seen any other prosecutors run this similar arc of campaigning on getting a particular person and then using it subsequently to raise campaign cash?
Not that I can think of. There might be somebody that's done it before. I think the DA or state's attorney in Atlanta, I think, is doing something similar with that case, using that as a campaign case, her case against Trump. But other than those, I don't know of any. It's certainly possible, but you know, $800,000 for a DA's race is enormous. I know in your circles it's not, but those type of races are usually very low dollar amounts.
So it's safe to say that there's financial motivation in the campaigns by multiple different DAs and politicians to quote unquote get Trump, correct?
At least a political financial motivation, not necessarily personal.
Correct. Thank you. My time has expired. I yield.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
I think there are a few things that should be cleared up today. First of all, we are not a democracy. We are a republic. I think it's extremely important to remember that and to understand our form of government.
Hey guys, Congresswoman Cat. Hey guys, Congresswoman Kat Cammack here, and just wrapped up votes and a Fox News hit, literally right off the House floor. You can see the doors right behind me. And I'm walking back with the team. Say hey, team. Oh, they just went around the corner. But had some pretty exciting news. So we have been working through a couple of different options about how do we clean up government, right? There's so much accountability that is yet to be had. There's such a lack of transparency that if we're really serious about it, we've got to take some really pretty big, significant action. And so one of the things that I wanted to let you guys know that we are doing that is official today is we are officially one of the co-sponsors for the Ethics Act. The Ethics Act has just been introduced, and it is bipartisan, bicameral, which means both Republicans and Democrats are supporting it, as well as members of the House and the Senate. Now, what this bill does, and I got to get in this elevator, so hopefully we go fast, because, sorry guys. Oh, you hit B. Bummer. Don't you hate it when someone hits the wrong button in the elevator? Man. But what this bill does is it prohibits members of the executive branch and of the legislative branch from trading individual stocks. Let me repeat that. Members of the executive, so the president, the vice president, senior officials within the administration, as well as members of the House and Senate, as well as their spouses and immediate family members, cannot trade stocks. That is so, so important because as members of Congress, I have meetings with CEOs, with these companies, and when they're in our office, they share information that would give someone who's trading those stocks an unfair advantage. And so we as Americans have constantly demanded that the people we elect go to Washington and write laws, make laws, but also focus on upholding their constitutional oath, not lining their pockets, right? So this will not only increase the penalties, but it outright bans the trading of individual stocks. Now, just to put this in perspective, to highlight why this is such a big problem, over 50% of Congress right now trades congressional stocks. That is insane. More than half, they trade stocks. And of that half, 33%, they average better returns than, let's ride, guys. We're gonna ride the trolley. Thank you, man. So, sorry, let me give you guys a point of perspective of what's going on here. Say hey, Brad. Hey, everybody. So we're on the trolley now, so sorry. You guys are getting the real authentic behind the scenes. So 33% of members that trade stocks have better returns than the S&P. And to give you a point of reference, the S&P right now, year to date, is averaging returns over 17%. 17%. So if you have someone who has insider information, you know, maybe like Nancy Pelosi, which by the way, her annual returns to date have been over 28%. 28% is what Nancy Pelosi is earning on her returns. So for me, this is a no-brainer, right? And if we're going to restore the confidence and faith and trust in the American people that their government is here to legislate, not line their pockets, then this is a common sense thing to do. So the Ethics Act, it's a huge, huge step forward. The fact that we have people, thank you, man, the fact that we have people coming together from all different backgrounds willing to support this is a huge step forward and something that we can all get behind. So how can you help? You can call your member of Congress and your senator and ask them to co-sponsor the Ethics Act. This is a huge deal. This will help us clean up Congress. It'll help us clean up the executive branch and really get rid of a lot of the corruption. So super, super excited about this. Please help us get momentum behind this and we'll keep you updated on what's going on. So take care, guys. More to come. Talk soon.
Cammack for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Boyle, I'm going to start with you. I wanted to learn more about your time as executive director. You served at least 2 acting chairs in that capacity, correct?
Yes.
And before that, you served in 2 other senior roles, is that right?
I served as general counsel and executive director.
Okay. I think we can both agree those are senior roles.
Excuse me?
I think we can both agree
Yes.
those are senior roles. Okay, perfect, thank you. So it seems that a lot of the issues and dysfunction that we've heard about today have occurred under your leadership as executive director. And while I recognize that you were not acting chair, it makes me wonder how all of this kind of happened under your watch. So digging into it, as part of a review of the 2019 data breach, the Inspector General made the following finding, quote, "The OIG found numerous examples of problems regarding integrity and ethical values in the clearinghouse. These problems involve both systematic issues and examples of individual managers failing to uphold government standards regarding integrity or ethical values. The most egregious example of a systematic ongoing failure by agency management to demonstrate a commitment to integrity and ethical values involved the statements of assurance relevant to the clearinghouse. Agency officials were grossly negligent at best and lied at worst when they signed statements of assurance indicating that internal controls regarding the clearinghouse were in place and operating effectively." So Commissioner Boyle, how do you account for the IG's characterization of agency candor? You were the executive director at that time, so what the heck was going on?
Well, thank you for the question. I think at the time of the clearinghouse disclosure, the agency was forthright in saying that there was a mistake that was made, a human error.
Or multiple?
Certainly. I think there was no question, and the agency was forthright in admitting that. There were numerous investigations, including by houses of Congress, and I think we're very forthright in admitting that there were mistakes, and we made efforts to correct those mistakes. And when there was a human error, which is really the source of the problem that you're talking about, we acted to correct those as best we could, and I certainly did the best I could under my to the best of my ability. So we instituted training, we tried to develop some technological solutions, and I understand that there was great concern, and I think we were very forthright in admitting that.
And I appreciate, taking accountability, right? But accountability means action. You said that there was technical training, but if you have people who are outright lying, my question is, who was fired?
I'm not aware that anybody was fired at that time, and there had been open recommendations for some period well after I was executive director, so I won't account for the last several years. But at that time, nobody was fired, but there was certainly training, and there was an attempt to address very openly the problems that we found, and nobody tried to say otherwise.
So no one was fired. Did anyone resign?
No.
Have the people who have been identified who lied, right, in this particular investigation, the people identified, have they remained in those positions or have they gone on to other positions?
Let me be clear. I understand you quoted from the Inspector General's report. I am not aware of anyone lying. I am not aware of anyone lying to me. And so I understand that that was his conclusion and how he characterized it, but I am not aware of anyone lying to me.
But you understand that this is the frustration that American people have in general. You're here before this committee asking for a bump in your budget, and yet we're finding through OIG reports where there have been instances of mischaracterizations, lying, real issues that have truly not been addressed. And I think saying, yes, we're taking responsibility, but what is the action that follows thereafter? I don't think training is enough. There has to be real accountability. So I'm curious, and as a follow-up, I'd like you to provide this committee with what has happened to those individuals that received the training, and I want to know if they've moved on into other positions. There is a saying in Washington, it's called failing up, and we tend to see that when we have problematic people, we tend to move them into other positions. So I'd be curious to see where those individuals and the roles that they played that were identified in that OIG report, I want to know where they are now. Can you provide this committee with that information?
Certainly. Again, I will make clear that they're not under my purview in my current role, and I will have to consult with the chair in terms of...
Mr. Chairman, will you provide that information to this committee?
We'll go back and take a look. Obviously, I wasn't there at the time, so I have to go back and look at the
At some point, if you're at the top of the ticket, you're right there. You're the head honcho. Buck stops with you, right?
Understood, and I would say
so you should be able to get that information.
Any breach of similar nature since that happened, and we've made sure that that information is protected going forward. So we can look to try and provide you information.
We don't try, we do. So yes, you will provide that information?
We'll provide the information we can find, and that's appropriate, yes.
All right. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Our gentlelady yields back. We'll recognize Mr. Cardenas from the great state of California for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of my amendment, which would restrict taxpayer funds from being used to finalize any rule or regulation that has resulted in an annual effect on the economy of $100 million or more at the Department of Interior, Environment, or related agencies. Under the Biden-Harris regime, the regulatory landscape has never been worse. Regulatory agencies within the Department of the Interior have exerted an extraordinary amount of power with very limited oversight. My amendment seeks to change this dynamic by requiring that any major rule or regulation proposed by these agencies must be approved by Congress before it can take effect. This means that the elected representatives of the American people would have a direct say in the regulations that govern our natural resources and public lands. It means that the individuals individuals who are closest to their constituents, who understand the needs and concerns of their communities, will be at the forefront of decision making. Now, I, of course, believe that common sense Americans would be incensed to know that in 2023 alone, the Biden-Harris regime ended the year by adding nearly 91,000 pages to the Federal Register of Regulations. Why should Americans care about that? Because those 91,000 pages of regulations just cost every American family over $15,000 annually. That's right, American families now pay $15,000 more every single year for the exact same goods and services, thanks to these onerous regulations. But it gets worse, because who do these hardworking families turn to fight these new costs, these new rules, these new regulations that are dictating every aspect of our lives? Not their elected officials. No, these expensive and expansive rules and regulations housed in those 91,000 pages, those are the doing of the nameless, faceless bureaucrats that dwell in basements all over Washington, D.C., who, by the way, are not elected. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, that should piss off every single American. It's a slap in the face that we, the people, have no recourse, which is why my amendment, reining in these rules and regulations, is so very important. You can and should be able to fire your elected officials. In the case of these all too powerful bureaucrats, you can't even find them, let alone stop them. This is why our amendment, the REINS Act, comes in and is so important. Now, under the Biden-Harris regime, regulations cost more than the entire federal discretionary budget. Let me repeat that. Under the Biden-Harris regime, they have added more in regulatory costs that add up to more than the entire federal discretionary budget. As a point of reference, the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which funded government, came in at a price tag of $1.7 trillion. The Biden-Harris regime, well, their price tag on their regulations was over $2 trillion, with a T. And it's not just the cost that is insane, it's the unachievable nature of these regulations. Take, for instance, the proposed greenhouse gas emission standards. There are no vehicles that exist today that can do the job and make the grade on the standard. Your leaf blower, your lawnmower at home, under the Biden-Harris regime, it needs to be zero emission. Good luck buying that in Biden's economy. Permitting requirements for livestock emissions, unachievable because of, well, science. Shocking, I know. What sounded good on paper is quite literally unfeasible in real life. Government is supposed to serve the people, not make their life harder, and quite frankly, that's all these regulations are doing, making life harder and more expensive. Mr. Speaker, there has never been a better time to rein in spending. We need to rein in these frivolous rules and regulations and rein in the true swamp creatures called bureaucrats. If you believe in the principle that significant regulatory decisions should not be made behind closed doors, but rather in the open halls of Congress where the voices of the American people can be heard, you'll support this amendment. If you believe that the American people should be at the center of decision-making process, you'll support this amendment. And if you believe in government transparency and accountability, you will support this amendment. It's time that this body starts asserting their constitutional Article I authority and adopt this amendment. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Maine seek recognition?
Claim time in opposition.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I oppose this amendment and I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back.
I am prepared to close.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, it's laid out pretty simply. If we are to really restore the people's voice in this chamber, we have to adopt this amendment, and I urge my colleagues to join me in putting the American people first. With that, I yield.
Ms. Cammack for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for our witnesses for appearing before us today. So much that we could dig into, and I want to thank my colleague from North Dakota for basically teeing this up. So according to HRSA, 17 people a day are dying waiting for an organ transplant, but of course this number fails to represent those individuals who were never allowed on the waiting list to begin with. So I know we've been in and out a little bit today, but I think this is something that should be addressed, and that is for those patients that have disabilities. And I had a particular situation in my district with one of my constituents, Zion Sarmiento, who was born with Down syndrome, and he was desperately in need of a heart transplant, but was denied by several hospitals, citing directly and indirectly that his intellectual disability devalued his life. He passed away at less than 4 months old, since he was denied a heart transplant. This legislation is about holding the transplant system and its participants accountable to the American people where it serves, but we can't forget those that are also left behind in the process. So I would strongly urge my colleagues to support final passage of the House bill to end discrimination based solely on a disability, the Charlotte Woodward Organ Transplant Discrimination Prevention Act, which passed out of this committee earlier this year by a unanimous vote. And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Cannon. In 2019, the National Council on Disability released a report on organ transplants in individuals with disabilities, which found that people with disabilities are frequently denied access. And that's a nice way of putting it. Denied access to organ transplants based on transplant centers of written and unwritten policies, excluding people with disabilities as candidates, and in some cases just outright refusing to evaluate a patient's medical suitability for organ transplants because of their disability. Does your transplant center or hospital have a non-discrimination policy that explicitly covers individuals with disabilities?
We don't have this policy explicitly, but I can tell you we will bend over backwards to do everything we can for a patient with a disability. You know, the issues at play is we want to make sure the patient's going to be able to take care of themselves, that they have the support in place, and we want to make sure that we do that. We have extensive social work support to help patients provide support for themselves. So yeah, we are 100% built around trying to help patients overcome the many barriers they face in.
But Doc, why don't you have that policy?
You know, we probably should have the policy written down. We don't have it written down because it's what we do day to day, and we believe in it. So I guess we haven't felt the need to write it because we do it, but you're right, that's an oversight. We should.
I would encourage you to do it. Would you commit right now to actually putting that policy in place?
Absolutely.
I think that the parents of baby Zion would feel better knowing that there was some progress in Washington being made on this. So I thank you for your commitment to that. Dr. Karp, same question to you. There you are.
Yes, I can tell you that I personally performed a combined heart-liver transplant in a patient that had Down syndrome, and I'm very supportive of this. I think our overall institutional policy is not to discriminate on the basis of disability.
Is it a written policy?
I'm sure it is a written policy. I can get it to you. I can't remember the last time I actually saw it, but I would be shocked if that wasn't a written policy of the university and medical center.
Okay. All right. Well, I'd appreciate you following up on that. And I want to turn to a Florida-specific issue. Now, more than 5,000 Floridians are currently on the waiting list for an organ transplant, and 48 of them die every month. As we are hearing, this death is not because American organ donors aren't stepping up. They certainly are, but because of the failures of the taxpayer-funded contractors. Last month, there were particularly alarming reports in Vox highlighting the over 3 years, 7,000 American that over the last 3 years, 7,000 Americans' pancreases, the organ that produces insulin, have been cut out from generous American organ donors, and the federal government does not know where they went. This seems to be a chronic, repeating issue in the federal government. Now, this week, I received a letter from a Florida woman who has been waiting 4 years for a pancreas transplant. You can imagine her horror when she reads reports like that the government has lost 7,000 pancreases. So we know that they're getting stuck in a freezer, but then we can't find them. This is absurd. Dr. Karp, Mr. Siegel, actually, you testified that many whistleblowers have come to you. Have you heard about this practice?
Yes, ma'am. And actually, I've shared with this committee a picture that I received from a whistleblower at an OPO, which was boxes of pancreases just sitting in freezers. And I can tell you, whistleblowers at that OPO, CMS tells OPOs that they need to recover pancreases for research. They haven't defined research. The joke at that OPO is that they're conducting research on the efficacy of garbage disposal A versus garbage disposal B.
Wow, that's disgusting.
I agree.
Dr. Karp, I have follow-up questions, but I will submit them in writing and would appreciate a response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired. I yield.
Thank you, gentlelady, for yielding back. Now recognize the chairman of the Health Subcommittee, Mr. Guthrie, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the recognition. Thank you for you all being here. This is very...
Well, thank you to my outstanding colleague from the great state of Arizona, Mr. Biggs, and also from the great state of Texas, Mr. Babin, for hosting this special order this evening. It's time to call a spade a spade. The wide open border policies of the Biden-Harris regime are killing, quite literally killing, Americans across the country. And there's no denying this. You know, I myself have been to the border 9 times, and I have ridden along with our agents through their shifts for hours, seeing firsthand the horror, the trafficking, the crime, the gang members, the abuse of women and children. I've seen the hundreds of thousands of wristbands littering the ground along the riverbanks, the wristbands that the cartels force people to wear to show which cartel they belong to, how much they have been paid, and of course, what number they are. It's such a big operation that the cartels have created the most efficient means possible to move people into the country illegally. And what's worse, the American government, Biden and Harris, they're helping the cartels do it. How, you might ask? Well, it's by taking away critical resources from our Border Patrol agents, by not enforcing the current laws on the books, and by taking away policies that stop the flow of illegals. Not by legislative action, but through executive action, of course. And I suppose we shouldn't be surprised that Biden and his border czar, Kamala Harris, they don't care about the law. When it gets in their way, they subvert it. It's clear they have zero regard for the American people, despite nearly 300 people a day dying of the trafficked fentanyl that comes across the border, or the thousands who have fallen victim to violent crime by illegals. They just simply ignore us, pretend like it doesn't happen, it doesn't exist. Now, while the vice president, aka border czar, pretends to care now all of a sudden about our southern border, I have a few questions for her. Madam Vice President, do you know how many Americans have been harmed by criminal illegal aliens? Do you know how many lives have been forever changed by the violence perpetrated against them by the people who broke our laws? You invited here, you flew here, they have crossed our border and harmed our citizens? As if every town in America wasn't already a border town, I ask this: what about the hundreds of thousands of unaccompanied minors trafficked into this country for whom the federal government knows nothing of their whereabouts? 325,000 kids that have been lost under your watch. Now, what have you done about that? Do their lives not matter? These children have been forced into child labor situations, sex trafficking, abuse. What has been done about that? And it happened on your watch. House Republicans have been correcting the record, shining a spotlight on the disastrous crisis at our southern border for 4 years now, sounding the alarm of the failures of this administration, and particularly border czar Harris. She's not fooling the American people by pretending to care all of a sudden. She's not fooling this chamber. She's certainly not fooling the angel families that have lost loved ones due to the reckless policies that she and President Biden have put forth. We need a real commander-in-chief, not a czar, not someone who's cackling, laughing and making jokes. It's not a laughing matter. We certainly don't need a trafficker-in-chief. That's what we have now. We need a real commander-in-chief, and November is coming. With that, I yield.
I thank the gentlelady.
We'll now hear from the Congresswoman for Florida's 3rd District, Cammack.
Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. I can't express enough gratitude and thanks for our state partners, the governor, for your leadership, for our local officials, Sheriff Darby Butler, who's here with us today, and all of his team who have been boots on the ground before, during, and now after the storm. There is a tremendous amount of work that is going to go into getting these communities back on their feet, and sometimes it's easy to get lost in the logistics of everything that's happening. But as we stand here where the Horseshoe Beach Marina once was, I want to put a little bit of context to where you guys are currently standing at. Over here, you see what remains of a marina that Miss Lois and Mr. Dennis built. And it had only been open 2.5 weeks after repairing from Hurricane Idalia and Tropical Storm Debbie. 2 weeks that this was open before Hurricane Helene came in and destroyed everything, including their home. There are so many residents here in Horseshoe Beach as their primary home that no longer have a place to call home. And so it's pretty tough when we're talking about all the logistics, all the moving parts, that sometimes the humanity element gets lost. So many people lost so much, and I can't thank our federal, state, local partners and nonprofit partners enough for the work that they're doing. I have to tell you, nobody does the recovery better than Governor DeSantis and the state of Florida. It was less than 24 hours ago that I put a bug in their ear that we needed 35 homes in Horseshoe Beach. And you just heard the governor announce they have 35 homes on the way here to Horseshoe. That is impressive. I also want to point out that the agricultural losses that our area is going to sustain will be over $1 billion. We have now seen 3 storms in 13 months, and it has been a frustrating process to get relief from USDA. Through the last couple of days, we've been on the phone with the Undersecretary of USDA asking for a strike team that we never saw during Ian, Irma, Debbie, or Idalia. Today, I'm proud to announce that there is a strike team en route to Florida that will help with our agricultural producers who got so hurt in this particular incident. The governor also made a request in his initial declaration to include Hamilton, Gilchrist, Suwannee, and Columbia County. At this point, they are not covered for Category A or individual assistance, so as a result, this morning we sent a letter to the President of the United States asking him to amend his declaration to include those communities that were also devastated in Hurricane Helene. And so it is our plea and our ask that the President amend that declaration so that folks in this region can get the help that they need. Again, I can't stress enough how impressive the recovery efforts have been to date, but there's a long way to go. And so folks need to understand that this is going to be more than just a week here on the ground. Boots on the ground are going to be required for a very long time. So thank you to all of our first responders, to the linemen. We have had some fatalities from Hurricane Helene. Thank you for everything that you guys are doing to get our communities back on track, and we will be doing our part to make sure that we get the federal resources in place so that the state and our local localities can begin the process to recover. Thank you.